in a series of podcasts about what we are to take as modern Christians from the early portions of the book of Genesis. We are now up to the 8th chapter of Genesis, and we're going to look at two of the main lessons that I think we're to take from this 8th chapter as modern Christians. And the first lesson that we take from Genesis chapter 8 is repeated over and over again in the Bible, but that's important because it's a lesson that we can forget. It's a lesson that society and our brains can just sort of melt away from us. But as this chapter opens, as Genesis chapter 8 opens, and Noah has built a boat and he's been on this boat for an awfully long time with a lot of smelly, stinky creatures, the chapter opens and it says that God remembered Noah. Now, as I spoke about in the podcast on chapter 7, one of the things we learned there is God's timing is not our timing. And Noah probably didn't understand the timing of why everything was happening the way that it did. He just had to have the faith and the patience to go through and let God's plan come to fruition. God's timing is not our timing, but it's even more than that. God's plans are not our plans in the sense that they're so extremely complicated. And they last so incredibly long. God is always playing the long game. God tells the prophet Isaiah, my thoughts are just not my thoughts and my ways are just not your ways. And if people were in charge of this long-term plan of having humans in communion with God, of redeeming a cursed creation, we would have gone about it in all the wrong ways. God's plans are beautiful and they're powerful and they always work, but they are not what we would always think. They're incredibly complicated, and sometimes the planning on them is very, very long. But that's a beautiful verse that opens chapter 8, and we can always rest assured that God remembered Noah and God remembers us. If we are trying to be a God follower with faith in his promises, if we are trying to allow God to use our lives to continue his work of redemption, his work of his glory in his creation, we can always rest assured, even when it seems like things aren't working, like the plan isn't in place, it seems like God has either forgotten us or maybe God has washed his hands of the whole thing and just moved away. We can always be assured that God remembered Noah, even though it must have felt like on some of those long, dark nights, being tossed around on an ark that seemed at every moment it wasn't going to survive the catastrophe, with animals that must have been highly agitated at various points. Noah must have felt alone and abandoned. But the Bible makes sure to tell us God remembered Noah. God did not abandon his plan. God did not abandon the person who had faith in his plan. God will not abandon his plans today, and God will not abandon the people who have faith in him today. God remembered Noah, and God remembered, fill in your own name. Powerful lesson, beautiful lesson, and something that Noah probably desperately needed to hear, and that we oftentimes desperately need to hear as well. And then finally, the second lesson in chapter 8, in the 22nd verse, God reminds Noah that even though there had been this cataclysmic worldwide disaster, that the world, really the universe, as it's stated in 8:22, is still going to run in this mechanically precise way, the exact same way that was promised to Adam. It would have been reasonable for Noah to go, I know Adam was told that the world was going to work mechanistically, but now with everything that I've just been through on the earth, does that still hold? And so God reminds Noah, God reminds us in chapter 8, verse 22, yes, the world will work that way. And we use terms today. God uses terms like the seasons will follow one another and the night will follow the day. And he talks about those sorts of things. Today, we would simply say something like the universe runs like clockwork, or it runs like a fine oiled machine. That's kind of how we would put it. And the purpose of God telling Adam that, and the purpose of God restating this to Noah, is that even though the world has been cursed by sin, and even though this worldwide cataclysmic disaster has occurred, humans can still logically subdue the earth. So remember, God told Adam, you need to subdue the earth and have dominion over it. We would use terms in the modern English language like you need to logically subdue the earth through science. You need to have dominion over God's creation through technological advancements that are based on that science. And those things, God is saying, are still possible. So non-Bible based human societies have almost always assumed that there was chaos, that the world was random to a large degree, and that it wasn't really possible for humans to subdue the earth, to have dominion over the earth. And it's absolutely no coincidence that it was Christian societies who developed science and who put science in place to figure out that mathematics is the language of God and that the world works in a consistent way and that we can do experiments and we can discover how the world works, how the universe works, and we can take that knowledge and we can have dominion over creation to some degree because we can use this understanding of how the world systematically works according to these logical mathematical principles, and we can put it into inventions and technology that allow us to subdue and have that dominion. So this is an absolutely huge piece. Again, it was stated to Adam, but it would be fair to say God said that the world was going to work in this logical, consistent manner, something that we could rationally, scientifically figure out. And then he gave us the commission to go rationally and scientifically figure it out. Yes, that's true. But after the curse of sin, does that still hold or did that disappear? And so God waits until sin hits its apex here. And he destroys much of life on earth because of that. And then he repeats that statement. Yes, the world still works in a logically mechanistic way. And yes, you can still rationally pursue scientific endeavors to subdue the earth and have dominion over it. I've got another podcast. If you're interested in this information, I've got another podcast that speaks about the relationship of Bible and science. The honest truth is, it's not just that the Bible is compatible with science. It's more accurate to say, again, given statements in earlier chapters, given Genesis 8 here, it's more accurate to say that the Bible actually compels humans to undertake science and promises that the world will work in such a way, consistently work in such a way that it can be studied and it can be understood. So if you're interested in more of how not only the Bible and science are compatible, but how the Bible actually compels humans to science and to technological advancement, you can look for those podcasts on the Bible and science on this channel. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this is Andy.